Welcome, everyone. I am Enrique Acosta Gonzales, and I am joined by Ashkan Tashvir. And in this episode, we will be speaking about From Burnout to Balance, unpacking the invisible load of leadership. And Ashkan, burnout is responsible for a range of negative consequences, including decreased productivity, increased call outs, job dissatisfaction, high turnover, and can even contribute to mental health problems like depression, anxiety, if left unaddressed. And this is the topic that I'm sure will resonate with a lot of people.
Hello, everyone, and hello, Enrique. Yeah, so this topic is quite close to home because, we deal with burnout um, ourselves in various different domains of life, various different dimensions of life, as well as like the work that we do with other leaders and other organizations. So, how about you create the context a bit this time, Enrique? Like, when you hear that, when you hear burnout, what comes to your mind? What kind of picture you see?
Yeah, the picture is grim if you if you ask me to describe it, because burnout technically is that you've spent yourself in all areas of your life in a particular subject matter or whatever it is that you're doing, to the point that your
Mm,
body starts to act in ways that you don't want it to, which is usually will end you in some type of hospital setting. If not, unfortunately, some have succumbed to all of the ramifications of leading and living a life of burnout.
mm,
We only have but so much of a wick to burn
yeah,
when it comes to our life. And if you go down a continual process where you keep burning that wick to the bottom, we experience some very terrible consequences.
yeah, yeah. Yes. So there's an ontology or the structure of leadership stress. It's like matters in life in general is going to come our way, and we ought to deal with them. Yeah. Now, particularly if you are a leader, then the matters that comes to you would be of certain kind. Yeah. For example, like you need to exercise a degree of responsibility that perhaps many others wouldn't need to. Yeah. So, um, in the midst of dealing with these matters as they come, and they can manifest themselves in missing deadlines, the promises that your team has made to your client, the customers. And then you have your sense of identity as an organization, as a person. There are lots of interplay, like basically going on there. The responsibilities, identity, brand, deadlines. Yeah. Um, as a leader, especially like if, for example, you are a CEO, you are at the top of the hierarchy, you would say. No, not necessarily the hierarchy from an authoritative perspective, but a responsibility, let's say. Yeah, at the end of the day, you're responsible for the outcome, and you're accountable, and your customers, your clients, are going to hold you to account. Um, so it's really good for us to actually look into this whatness of um leadership stress that can come from this. But before that, I would like to bring our attention to this very thing that when things happen, when the matters come on our way, you can have two different leaders that are dealing with the exact same problem, the exact same situation, but one is going to experience burnout, one is going to deal with tremendous amount of stress, and the other one may respond quite differently. So while it's important for us to understand the structure of this leadership stress due to all of these things that we just discussed, I've mentioned, But I want to bring our attention to the fact that the same exact thing can happen to two different leaders, and they're going to experiencing it very differently. Yeah. Um, so there is a little bit of truism associated, or like there's a factual point to the situation. For example, we're missing deadline. Yeah, it's very crystal clear. There's a scope of work. This deliverables needed to be delivered like by this time, and it's not happening. Yeah. So on a factual point, we can actually study the whatness of what is going on. At the same time, we can predict the kind of stress that it can generate. But then on top of these, on top of this ontology or the whatness of that problem, then we have the the experiences that two different individuals, two different leaders in response to the same exact problem can have. And that's a phenomenological part to the story. Now, why do you think that um, two different leaders may experience it completely differently? And therefore, going back to the topic of this session, this episode, then one may be in a situation of burnout, and the other one would successfully move past from that situation.
Yeah, I think a lot has to do with resiliency
Hmm.
inside of a person. I was one person that was in a setting.
Yeah.
I succumbed to the pressures of that setting, and a
Yeah.
counterpart of mine breezed right through it.
Yeah.
And I could not explain to myself how come, with all my vast experience and my knowledge of the subject that we were handling, why
Mm.
it really got me to the point where I was physically impaired from acting, when this other person just went right through it like if it was nothing. And it was just
Yeah.
that she was built in resiliency in that particular kind of subject, and she did well and I did not.
Yeah. No. So you brought up a very interesting point. You said you said resiliency, being resilient. That's a really good one. So I would like to expand on that. Like, see, I would like to bring our attention to the totality of our meta content. Yeah. So being resilient, of course, is a very important one, but it's just one of the things that one of the meanings that is going to influence our performance in the time at the time that we need to be dealing with situations of that kind. So let's consider all of the things that are happening, and it's creating that situation for us that we need to respond to content. Yeah. And so we're receiving all this content, for example, like the missed deadline, the conversations that are going on, the dissatisfaction of the customer, internal meetings in discussing not what to do, how to communicate that, etc., etc. At the same time, then I want to bring your attention to your meta content, meaning that how you, as a leader, what kind of mental framework, basically, what kind of mental framework you have, what kind of meta content you have, that then as a result of that, then you're interpreting whatever's going on regarding that situation in a particular way, and then therefore you're letting that get into you, or leading you to tremendous amount of stress, as you said, like, being impaired, etc., etc. Or on the other side, it's actually supporting you to address the matters in a most effective possible way, and then you can, go through it. It's our meta content that includes how you relate to resilience, like how you relate to resilience, how you relate to responsibility, how you relate to commitment, how you relate to vulnerability in such situations that you know you're at fault, you know that um, your team is responsible for not delivering what it was promised. And now it's the time that you basically need to go back, tap into your cognitive map, as I call it in the meta content discourse in the meta content book. Basically, how you relate to each and every of these different qualities, um, uh, because the health of your relationship with each and every of these different qualities, including resilience, at the end of the day, are going to support you to act upon them and address the problem or be crushed underneath it. Yeah. So to make it more tangible, it's like, okay, so the deadline is not being met. You had an internal conversation with your team, and you need to go through a level of analysis, yeah, as a leader, not in-depth analysis necessarily right at the time, but you want to understand what's going on here. Now, the way, like one of the layers of your meta content is your narrative lens, or the way that you interpret events. So the way that you're reading it, and the way that you make up stories, you go, oh, now it's going to damage our brand, da, 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 da. And then you keep going into this, what if that, go through all of these different anxiety generating, stress generating conversation where say you are creating that. Yeah. Now, in reality, it could have been like you basically go quite in a transparent manner, vulnerably, you go and communicate that, you explain what's happening, and then you repromise. And there's a chance that the client can appreciate what's going on. They can actually, you can come to a kind of a good terms that it's going to still work. But instead of doing that, you may go and then you start being a victim, and you may keep victimizing yourself. You may react, and you may, I mean, like not be assertive, and then you may let the pendulum of aggression swing and try to um, like yell at someone or in your team, or blame, etc., that at the end of the day it's not going to work. So the way within your mental framework, your meta content, you may choose to interpret whatever is going on and create a stories and make meaning of that. um, that's part of your meta content. Now, leader number one can have a way of narrative creation, storytelling for themselves, and the other person, the leader B, would have a completely different way of interpreting whatever is going on. So the same factual thing is happening, but these two different individuals, these two different leaders, depends on one of the layers of their mental model or the meta content, as I call it. They're going to interpret it differently. Similarly, we mentioned cognitive map, like for example, like how you relate to resilience, as you mentioned. Like if you have a relatively healthy relationship with resilience, you're not going to be crushed under this crisis, difficulty, adversity, whatever you want to call it, missing deadlines, etc., etc. You may bounce back. You may have this tendency that you know that you're out of integrity, your team is out of integrity, and you want to restore it ASAP. Or if you have an unhealthy relationship with this node, or this meaning, this concept of resilience within your overall cognitive map, then you may be fully crushed under it, and you may not be able to bounce back. Yeah. It's fragility in comparison with resilience. So just two of the layers of the meta content, or your mental framework, I just touched on. Your cognitive map, what things are for you, and how those things are related. The second, we talked about narrative or narrative lens, the way that you interpret events as they're unfolding. And there are other layers to our meta content, which we've talked about it in previous episodes. For example, like your perspective, from which angle you're looking into the matter, or like which paradigm actually you are you have trained yourself and you're tapping into within the domain of um, uh, let's say conflict resolution or dealing with crisis. There are existing models that you can go and learn that they can provide you with the knowledge that is required, plus the methodologies and the mental models. Like mental model is another um, a layer to our meta content or the mental framework that they can tell us what to do or how to do things. Yeah. So while cognitive map is what things are for you, things like resilience or commitment, um, a mental model is how things work for you, processes, procedures, your know-hows. So therefore, the more the richer your existing meta content is, you have way more things in your arsenal that you can basically leverage in tackling the very problem you're dealing with. Yeah. So therefore, the whole point here is if you're dealing with um, uh, uncomfortable situation, unpleasant situation, missing a deadline, something that is happening as a leader, you can have different options in how you're going to respond to that as opposed to immediately react. The way that you're going to respond to that, it's not just something you know on the surface, there's a substance to that. It goes back to your existing meta content, how rich your existing meta content is, what kind of mental model you have, what kind of like how your cognitive map is shaped, how you relate to various different. It may seem complex, but at the end of the day, you're going to act upon what you know down deep there. So your behaviors at the end of the day, the decisions that you're going to make and the actions you're going to take are in great part driven by your existing meta content. That's basically what we're talking about. Yeah. So now, tangibly, what does this tell you, Enrique? You're dealing with something as a leader. Now we're coming here and we're talking about this thing that you have a meta content, you have a mental framework, how you relate to things, your cognitive map, your narrative lens, your interpretations of what's going on. So we're talking about that. Do you think that is it help? I mean, it's helpful, or you may go, oh, okay, so what? I'm dealing with the crisis. Like I don't have time to go back and then look into my deep level of mental framework.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that specifically because most leaders will tell you, I don't have time for that. I need to answer
Mm,
this mail. The fire is on. I have to rely on my training, my knowledge, and what I could do to answer this today. But what in turn they do is they pile on for the next one. I mean, this is
mm,
this is a process that you need to employ in order for you to make the next one not a pile.
yeah,
And if you can go through this, and you don't have to say, "Hey, everybody, stop. Let's go through the cognitive. Let's go through this." You don't have to do it.
mm,
You train yourself in a way where you instinctively go through these things as a cycle, and then you
yeah,
employ what you have brought out as a tool, right? As a aid to you during that. And just like when we train for emergencies, right? We don't go
yeah,
back to the manual to see and make sure. No, we've been experienced. We've trained enough that this
yeah,
becomes second nature. But if you don't make it second nature, what you'll do is you'll continue to stress your system out, and
yeah.
you'll never catch up if you don't have something to aid you, like the meta content type of information.
Yeah, so yes, yes. And the thing is, obviously, like my suggestion is not like to pause and then go and then look into your mental model or your cognitive map in the face of the problem you're dealing with. No, what we're discussing here is the description of what is already at play. So we're basically raising awareness around the ontology or the isness of how you may respond, whether you're conscious about it or not. The thing is, you do have an existing mental model. Sorry, you do have existing mental framework or meta content, including your mental models or how you deal with things. Yeah. And your mental model is a fancy term, to many people, but at the end of the day, it's like how you manage to delegate things, how you manage to um, uh, communicate something that you guess that your client may not take it well. How is it that these how to's are the things that you actually have learned throughout your career in order for you to become that leader? What basically we're bringing your attention to, or I'm bringing your attention to as a leader, is you do have an existing mental framework, you do have an existing meta content. Now, in dealing with the content out there, whatever basically is happening, your different various different layers of your intellectual substrate or the mental model, the mental framework or the meta content, as I call it, are at play. Now, this you may say, okay, so what? Oh, well, so what is number one is preparedness. So if you know that in order for you to become a better and better leader as you go, you are enriching and authenticating various different parts within the various different layers of your existing meta content. That basically means growth, yeah. So you do have a mental framework, meta content at the moment that's been influenced by so many different things: your upbringing, your religion, your political ideology, like all the things you've learned at university, for example, if you have gone to a university, and your years of career to the point that then you're now a leader. You have an existing mental framework, or as I call it, meta content. You've built that. Now, some people build that more consciously than others. Some people simply say, "Oh, through my experiences, my knowledge and experiences." Well, your knowledge and experiences are being categorized and are be- being helping you to collect different pieces in a big puzzle that you're creating in the back of your mind. So basically, we're bringing your attention that there is an existing meta content. In transformational leadership, you constantly want to let the matters out there in the world, different case studies that you deal with, and your experiences, and the more you learn, your knowledge, etc., to basically come and filling the gaps, and also refine the parts that you have misconception of. In another word, what we're saying is you have an existing meta content that is constructed. Now, in part, you've been the source of that construction, or you have been the cause of that construction, and in some other parts you haven't been. Now, as a leader, I would like to bring your attention to the very fact that all you know is construct, yeah, is constructed. Not all there is construct, but all you know is constructed. Um, and and there's a good news when you face that, because if it's constructed, then it can be deconstructed. So basically, you can break it down to smaller chunks, as I have these layers in the nested theory of sense making, so that you can make sense of them, different bits and pieces of it. Yeah, it's going to help you focus on individual constituent parts within your existing meta content or mental framework. That will provide this chance for you to identify quite authentically, the parts that are misconstructed, or they're not well constructed, you can say, or they're misplaced. And then you're going to reconstruct that as you go. Now, naturally, this happens to a degree. That's why I call it ontological. This is the isness of growth and transformation, anyways. But if you are becoming more conscious, deliberately conscious or aware of this very thing, then you can engineer it better. And that's the whole conversation here. If you manage to do that, you're going to gradually build a more robust being within you. You have a better, more authentic, congruent way of making sense of and develop your conceptions of various different parts of reality and the content, like whatever is basically happening out there within the domain that you're operating. Let's say, for example, in leading an organization, the more you develop these authentic conceptions of various different parts of reality, and the better and in a more authentic manner you can make sense of what's going on in your industry, in your market, within your organization, within you, this exposure and robustness of your mental framework, gradually as you put them in action, they're going to contribute to your overall integrity as a person. You become a more robust person in dealing with all of these methods that we mentioned from the get-go that life brings to us. Because at the end of the day, there's lots of suffering out there. Some part of this suffering can be easily categorized as unnecessary suffering. Now, at the end of the day, you ought to choose your suffering. Yeah. Either you go to the gym and then you deal with the suffering and the pain of waking up in the morning, going to the gym, and then deal with all these like heavy um, things that you need to do, or gradually you will be dealing with the suffering that it comes with diabetes and like obesity, etc., etc. So it's more like you are to choose as a leader, you are to choose your suffering in great part. And now that you need to choose your suffering, why not to choose a suffering that you find it worthwhile and meaningful, that it can bring meaning to your life? So the whole thing that basically we're discussing here is, yes, you're going to be crushed, you're going to deal with burnout if you're not prepared and you haven't built a robust mental framework, or I call it metacontent, and then you didn't let this robust, seemingly robust, um, relatively robust mental framework or metacontent influence your overall integrity, yeah, influence your influence decisions, and influence your behaviors at the end of the day. So if you have ignored all of that, uh, it is very likely that you're going to be crushed and dealing with burnout. So if you're dealing with burnout, I don't have any quick tips and like advice for you. It's not like, okay, so now from now on do this and then you're not going to experience burnout. For going from burnout to balance, it's a long-term journey. You want to master your sense making framework. You want to master your decision making framework. You want to master your action taking framework. And in the middle of that, you definitely want to look into your axiological model, your value of hierarchies and priorities and ethics. So basically, being a leader demands you quite harshly sometimes to cover these areas that we've said: sense making, decision making, action taking, and behavior at the end of the day. And I've added like ethics and axiology, or basically prioritization and value. What is value to you into the mix? Now, some may say, Enrique, that, oh, this is way too complex. Well, I mean, I didn't make it complex by just articulating it. As a matter of the fact, my whole aim with my books and the body of work and everything, including these conversations we're having, is to articulate this complexity in as simple as possible language. Plus, in part, I'm trying to encapsulate some part of this complexity by creating tools that then the leaders out there, they can actually leverage and find it easier to do the things that they need to do anyways. Yeah, so tools like the being framework, tools like the conception worksheet, we talked about all these things. The tools like the nested theory of sense making, by creating the structured way of sense making, high level. so that then you know the layers to your intellectual substrate, and so on and so forth. And then when it comes to the execution, particularly when we talk about human performance and effectiveness, then we have the being framework and the tools associated with that. So now, going through all of that, like in a practical sense, if there's still people out there that are listening to us, Enrique, they go, oh, like, oh, I get it. Like intellectually, this makes sense, but life is not philosophy or philosophy class. I have things to deal with. Right at there are lots of things on my table. I need to go in and attend to them. What do you say to them?
Well, first let me address this because you're talking about the complexity of all
Yeah.
that you are taking. And so the way I've envisioned this is that you're bringing to the light the fact that there is a manual with all these different things that you should consider. If, let's just say, if you want a bike, you just don't take the big pieces and put it together and forget about the little pieces. You're not going to be riding a bike. you
Mm,
you'll be pushing a piece of metal with two
mm,
tires, right? That's what you'll be doing. What we've explained or what we've tried to bring to light here is that there are these little parts that if you don't implement them, you don't put a thought to them, you don't bring them out, you start to work with them in your life, you will not operate in integrity. The integrity won't be there. And so all these different aspects that Ashcan is bringing up with the content that we've been talking about with the books is so that you can operate at your optimal, the
mm,
best that you can. Now, I'll tell you, leaders of nowadays, the ones that at least that I work with and the ones that I've known, they'll take a booklet and they open and they see little parts and they push that to the side and say, I'm working just fine without it.
mm,
Well, what's happening is that you're working your way to burnout, actually. You're not
mm,
working just fine. Just
mm.
because you can make it day to day doesn't mean that you're working just fine. So
Yeah.
we bring all these things out so that you can take advantage of those little pieces that you have not known about. We talk about the invisible load of leadership. There's a lot that we carry that we just don't know about. And so all of these episodes and things that and videos that we've been making are so that you can put the whole thing together piece by piece and become integral. And so yeah, there's a lot to discover. Yes, there's a lot to try to figure out. But like I love what you said earlier. You got to pick your pain here, right? It's going to be
Mm,
painful somewhere. So pick the right amount of pain that will actually lead you to progress. And I think that
yeah.
every leader will benefit from all that you've said and all that you have unveiled through the books and the knowledge that you share.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, I wish that there was something that you can, like a vaccine, like you can inject it and then it can help us be more resilient or integrous and not be crushed under the matters of life, the burden of life to be carried. But the being realistic, there's no such thing, and then that's perhaps why some of us sometimes resort into um, like dissociate ourselves from reality because like, there's so much, and then we deal with the overwhelm. That's why we may find refuge in consuming or abusing alcohol or other or drugs, etc., etc. And the thing is, we need to dare to be, and daring to be requires courage and not only courage, but on top of that, then we go, okay, so now that I have chosen to be, then there's so much content out there in the world. There's all of these things that I don't intrinsically know how to relate to them. Various different parts of reality, various different concepts and ideas and meanings. And whether we like it or not, if you really want to perform, your authentic understanding of how things are is extremely important. And at the end of the day, like as I said, like you do have a meta content, and most of the highly successful leaders and high achievers, as I call them, in a being book, I've studied, they are extremely studious people, beyond imagination to the majority of people out there. They leverage other people's knowledge and resources. They continuously are in the process of enriching their existing meta content. The learning, and they have process around internalizing that knowledge, make it relatable to the context of what it matters to them most. So where I call it like a reception, perception, conception in the being discourse, it's like they don't only perceive, they only learn knowledge, but they make it relatable um, to the context of their own life or what matters most to them. So there's no shortcut and there's no way to escape from this. You want to be a leader, you want to be an effective leader, you want to um, be very focused on and the enrichment, continuous growth of your and authentication of your meta content, because the richer meta content you have, um, the the more the biggest share you have of the reality, because the mirror within you is reflecting a bigger portion of what is going out there. You're exposed to more, you understand more, and you have more in your arsenal to be resourceful and to be resilient and not be crushed. And therefore, that invisible load of leadership that we talked about, yes, we could talk about like, oh, like how leaders are being stressed and then they're dealing with so much and everything. And yes, but at the end of the day, the solution to that, the high level solution to that is, you have a lot on your plate, just get a bigger plate. You think that certain matters in life are really bothering you to the point that you may get close to burnout, just become more robust. That's why I call the book Being, and then the subtitle is The Source of Power. In order for us to be powerful, we need to go back within and need to look into our sense making framework, decision making framework, ethics and axiology, and um, uh, prioritization, and action taking framework. So, this end to end focus at the end of the day, something is necessary. I hope that this conversation around the meta content and the being discourse and contextualizing it in going from burnout to balance um, helps our audience, Enrique. Um, and I just like the thing is, I wish that there was something that you can, like a vaccine, like you can inject it and then it can help us be more resilient or integrous and not be crushed under the matters of life, the burden of life to be carried. But the being realistic, there's no such thing, and then that's perhaps why some of us sometimes resort into um, like dissociate ourselves from reality, because there's so much and then we deal with the overwhelm. That's why we may find refuge in consuming or abusing alcohol or other or drugs, etc., etc. And the thing is, we need to dare to be, and daring to be requires courage, and not only courage, but on top of that, then we go, okay, so now that I have chosen to be, then there's so much content out there in the world. There's all of these things that I don't intrinsically know how to relate to them. Various different parts of reality, various different concepts and ideas and meanings. And whether we like it or not, if you really want to perform, your authentic understanding of how things are is extremely important. And at the end of the day, like as I said, like you do have a meta content, and most of the highly successful leaders and high achievers, as I call them, in a being book, I've studied, they are extremely studious people, beyond imagination to the majority of people out there. They leverage other people's knowledge and resources. They continuously are in the process of enriching their existing meta content. The learning, and they have processes around internalizing that knowledge, make it relatable to the context of what it matters to them most. So where I call it like a reception, perception, conception in the being discourse, it's like they don't only perceive, they only learn knowledge, but they make it relatable um, to the context of their own life or what matters most to them. So there's no shortcut and there's no way to escape from this. You want to be a leader, you want to be an effective leader, you want to um, be very focused on and the enrichment, continuous growth of your and authentication of your meta content, because the richer meta content you have, um, the the more the bigger share you have of the reality, because the mirror within you is reflecting a bigger portion of what is going out there. You're exposed to more, you understand more, and you have more in your arsenal to be resourceful and to be resilient and not be crushed. And therefore, that invisible load of leadership that we talked about, yes, we could talk about like, oh, like how leaders are being stressed and then they're dealing with so much and everything. But and yes, but at the end of the day, the solution to that, the high level solution to that is, you have a lot on your plate, just get a bigger plate. You think that certain matters in life are really bothering you to the point that you may get close to burnout, just become more robust. That's why I call the book Being, and then the subtitle is The Source of Power. In order for us to be powerful, we need to go back within and we need to look into our sense making framework, decision making framework, ethics and axiology, and um, uh, prioritization, and action taking framework. So, this end to end focus at the end of the day, something is necessary. I hope that this conversation around the meta content and the being discourse and contextualizing it in um, going from burnout to balance um, helps our audience, Enrique. Um, and I just like end it here. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Enrique.